The scream tore through the canyon like a knife through canvas, and Dakota Zane didn't hesitate before spurring his horse toward the sound that cut through the Arizona afternoon. His heart hammered against his ribs as he dismounted near the base of Patagonia Mountain, eyes scanning the rocky face until he spotted her, a splash of calico fabric against gray stone about 40 feet up. She was pinned, one leg caught beneath a boulder that must have shifted during her climb, and even from this distance he could see the way her body trembled with pain and shock. "Hold on," he shouted, his voice echoing off the canyon walls. "I'm coming up." The woman's face turned toward him, pale and streaked with dirt and tears. "The rocks are unstable," she called back, her voice wavering. "You'll fall." Dakota was already studying the cliff face, mapping his route with the practiced eye of someone who had spent 26 years living in this unforgiving territory. The rocks were loose. That much was obvious from the debris scattered at the base, but he had climbed worse in his years working cattle through these mountains. He tested the first handhold, feeling the stone shift slightly under his weight, then pulled himself up. "What's your name?" He called as he climbed, partly to keep her conscious and partly to keep his own mind focused on something other than the way the rocks groaned beneath his boots. "Magnolia," she answered after a moment. "Magnolia Hayes." "Well, Miss Hayes, I'm Dakota Zane, and I need you to stay awake for me." He grabbed for a protruding rock and felt it give way entirely, sending chunks of stone tumbling down the mountainside. He pressed himself flat against the cliff face, breathing hard, then found another route. "I'm awake," she said, and he could hear the pain threading through her words. "I just wish I wasn't." Dakota pulled himself up another few feet, his fingers finding purchase in a narrow crack. Sweat dripped into his eyes despite the October coolness, and he could feel his muscles burning with the effort. The cliff face seemed to conspire against him, every handhold suspect, every foothold temporary. A large section of rock to his left suddenly crumbled away, cascading down in a shower of dust and stone. "Be careful," Magnolia breathed, and when he glanced up, their eyes met for the first time. Hers were the color of honey in sunlight, wide with fear, but also with something else, a fierce determination that told him she was a fighter. "Always am," he replied, though his current position clinging to an unstable mountain face suggested otherwise. He reached for the next handhold and continued his ascent. It took him nearly 20 minutes to reach her, 20 minutes of testing each grip, of redistributing his weight carefully, of ignoring the way loose stones constantly shifted beneath him. When he finally pulled himself up to the narrow ledge where she was trapped, he immediately assessed the situation. The boulder pinning her leg wasn't enormous, but it was wedged at an angle that made it dangerous to move. Her right leg disappeared beneath it, and he could see the unnatural angle of her boot. "How bad is it?" he asked, kneeling beside her. "Bad enough," she said through gritted teeth. "I was collecting plant specimens for the doctor in Nogales. I thought this ledge was stable." Dakota examined the boulder carefully, running his hands along its edges, testing its weight. "I'm going to have to lever it off you. It's going to hurt." "It already hurts," Magnolia said, and there was a thread of dark humor in her voice that made him look at her more closely. Even in pain, with her dark hair falling loose from its pins and dust coating her face, she was striking. Not in the delicate way of the saloon girls in town, but in a way that suggested strength and substance. He stripped off his vest and wedged it under the boulder's edge, then found a sturdy piece of fallen rock to use as a lever. "On 3, he said. 1, 2, 3. He threw all his weight against the lever, and the boulder shifted with a grinding sound that sent his heart into his throat. Magnolia cried out, biting down on her lip hard enough to draw blood, but she didn't faint. The boulder rolled slightly to the side, and Dakota kicked it further away before dropping to his knees beside her. Her leg was badly injured, the ankle clearly broken and already swelling. Blood seeped through her torn stocking, and he could see the beginning of deep bruising, but she was free. "Can you move it?" he asked. "I don't think I should try," she said, her voice thin with pain. Dakota looked at the cliff face below them, then back at her. "I'm going to have to carry you down." "That's impossible. You barely made it up here yourself, and these rocks are ready to give way any moment." "Then we better move fast," he said. And before she could protest further, he was maneuvering her onto his back, her arms wrapped around his neck, her injured leg positioned as carefully as he could manage. She was lighter than he expected, but not fragile, and he could feel the tension in her body as she tried not to put too much weight on him. "If we fall, I'm going to be very angry with you," she said against his ear, and he found himself almost grinning despite their situation. "Noted," he replied, and began the descent. If climbing up had been difficult, climbing down with Magnolia on his back was nearly impossible. Every movement had to be calculated, every handhold tested twice. He couldn't see his footing, had to rely on memory and instinct, and several times he felt rocks give way beneath his boots, leaving him scrambling for new purchase. Magnolia stayed silent except for small gasps of pain when his movements jostled her leg, and he was grateful for her strength because any struggling would have sent them both tumbling down. Halfway down, a large section of the cliff face suddenly crumbled. Dakota felt the rock beneath his right foot disintegrate, and he swung hard to the left, his fingers finding a jutting stone that held just long enough for him to find new footing. Magnolia's arms tightened around his neck, and he could feel her heart pounding against his back. "Still angry if we fall?" he asked, trying to keep the fear out of his voice. "Furious," she confirmed, and he felt something warm bloom in his chest at her determination. The last 15 feet were the worst. The rocks were loose, destabilized by their descent, and Dakota could feel the entire cliff face shifting. He half climbed, half slid down the remaining distance, and when his boots finally hit solid ground, he staggered forward several steps before carefully lowering Magnolia to sit against a large boulder. She was pale, her face slick with sweat, but she was smiling. "We made it." "We did," he agreed, breathing hard. His hands were scraped raw, his shirt soaked through with sweat, but they were alive. He looked up at the cliff face and saw how much rock had come loose during their descent. Another few minutes and the whole section might have given way entirely. "I need to get you to the doctor," he said, already moving toward where he had left his horse. The gelding, a steady bay named Whiskey, had wisely moved a safe distance from the falling rocks but came when Dakota whistled. "My specimens," Magnolia said suddenly. "My collection bag, it's up there." "You nearly died for those specimens. I'm not going back up there." "But Dr. Mercer needs them. He's studying native plants for their medicinal properties, and some of those samples are rare." Dakota stared at her in disbelief. "You're arguing about plants when your leg is broken." "The plants are important," she insisted, lifting her chin in a way that suggested she was used to defending her interests. "I'm Dr. Mercer's research assistant. This isn't some hobby." He studied her for a long moment, seeing the passion in her eyes, the way she held herself despite the obvious pain. "Where's your bag?" "On the ledge near where I was trapped." She hesitated. "But the rocks are unstable, I know." He grabbed his canteen from his saddle and handed it to her. "Drink. I'll be quick." "Dakota, don't. It's not worth risking your life again." But he was already heading back toward the cliff face, moving along the base until he found a different route up, one that looked marginally more stable. The climb was faster this time, born of recklessness and something he didn't want to examine too closely. When he reached the ledge, he grabbed the worn leather satchel and slung it over his shoulder, then made his way back down in half the time. Magnolia's eyes were bright when he handed her the bag. "You didn't have to do that." "I know," he said, and their eyes met and held for a moment that stretched longer than it should have. He cleared his throat and looked away first. "Now can we get you to the doctor?" The ride to Nogales took nearly an hour, with Magnolia cradled in front of him on the saddle, her back against his chest. He kept Whiskey to a careful walk, trying to minimize the jostling, but he could feel the way she tensed with every step, could hear the small sounds of pain she tried to suppress. To distract them both, he asked questions. "How long have you been working for Dr. Mercer?" 2 years, she said. "I came to Nogales in 1883, right after my father died. He was a botanist in Philadelphia, and he taught me everything he knew about plants. When I saw Dr. Mercer's advertisement for a research assistant, I took the train west. That's a long way to come alone. I didn't have much keeping me in Philadelphia. My mother died when I was young, and my father never remarried. After he passed, there was nothing left for me there except memories and his debts." Dakota heard the loneliness in her voice, recognized it because it mirrored his own. "I came to Arizona Territory 10 years ago," he offered. "After my parents' ranch in Texas failed during the drought, worked cattle drives for years before I managed to save enough to buy my own small, spread-outside town." "Do you have family here?" "No. My older brother died of fever when we were young, and my parents passed within a year of each other after we lost the ranch. It's just me now." "Just you," she repeated softly, and he felt her relax slightly against him, as if his honesty had earned some measure of trust. When they finally reached Nogales, the sun was beginning to sink toward the horizon, painting the desert in shades of gold and crimson. The town was small but growing, situated right on the border with Mexico, a place where cultures mixed and opportunities could be found if you were willing to work hard enough. Dakota guided Whiskey directly to Dr. Mercer's office on the main street, a modest adobe building with a painted sign swinging in the evening breeze. Dr. Mercer himself came rushing out when Dakota called, a thin man in his 50s with wire-rimmed spectacles and stains on his shirt sleeves. "Magnolia, what happened?" "Rock slide on Patagonia Mountain," Dakota explained, carefully dismounting and then lifting Magnolia down. "Her ankle is broken, maybe her leg too." The doctor's face tightened with concern, and he helped Dakota carry her inside to the examination room. "Put her on the table here. Magnolia, I told you to be careful in those mountains." "I was careful," she protested. "The ledge just gave way." "If it wasn't for Mr. Zane, you would still be up there," Dr. Mercer said sternly, but his hands were gentle as he began cutting away her boot and stocking to examine the injury. Dakota turned away to give her privacy, staring at the shelves lined with bottles and jars, medical instruments gleaming in the lamplight. "Mr. Zane," Dr. Mercer called after several minutes, "could you assist me? I need to set this bone, and I require someone strong to hold her steady." Dakota returned to the table and positioned himself as directed, his hands on Magnolia's shoulders. She looked up at him, fear clear in her eyes, and he found himself saying, "Look at me. Just keep looking at me." She did, her honey-colored eyes locked on his as Dr. Mercer worked. When he set the bone, she cried out and her hands flew up to grip Dakota's forearms, her fingers digging in hard enough to leave marks. But she didn't look away, and neither did he. When it was over, she was shaking and tears streamed down her face. But there was something else there too, a connection that had formed somewhere on that unstable mountain, strengthened with each moment they had shared. "The bone is set," Dr. Mercer announced, wrapping her leg in splints and bandages. "But you will need to stay off it for several weeks. No climbing, no long walks, no field work." "But the research can wait," the doctor said firmly. "Your health cannot." Dakota watched the frustration play across Magnolia's face, saw how much it cost her to nod in acceptance. When Dr. Mercer stepped away to wash his hands, Dakota leaned closer. "Where are you staying? I can take you home." "I rent a room above the general store," she said quietly. "But there are stairs." "I'll manage the stairs." Dr. Mercer turned back, frowning. "Actually, that won't work. Magnolia, you need someone to help you for the first few days at least, and Mrs. Chen has her hands full with the store. Perhaps you could stay at the boarding house, Mrs. Patricia could look in on you." "I can't afford," Magnolia began, but Dakota interrupted. "My ranch isn't far from town. It's a small house, but there's a spare room. You could stay there until you're mobile enough to manage stairs." Both Magnolia and Dr. Mercer stared at him. Dakota felt heat rise in his face. "I mean, it's practical. I work from home most days, managing my cattle. I could help you get around, and you wouldn't have to pay for boarding." "That's highly irregular," Dr. Mercer said slowly, but Dakota could see him considering it. "Although Magnolia would need constant assistance for the first week, and there really isn't anyone else available. The boarding house is full with railroad surveyors, and Mrs. Chen truly is overwhelmed." "I don't want to impose," Magnolia said, but Dakota could see the worry in her eyes, the calculation of costs she couldn't afford. "It's not an imposition," he said. "You need help and I have space. It's just practical." What wasn't practical was the way his heart had been pounding since he first heard her scream, or the way something had shifted in his chest when she smiled at him on that mountain. But he kept those thoughts to himself. Dr. Mercer looked between them for a long moment, then nodded. "I suppose it's the best option under the circumstances. But Magnolia, if you're uncomfortable at any point, I'll be fine," she said. And when she looked at Dakota, there was trust in her eyes that he vowed not to betray. The ride to Dakota's ranch took another 30 minutes in the gathering dark. Magnolia dozed against him, exhausted by pain and shock, and he kept one arm around her waist to hold her steady. When they finally reached his property, he felt a moment of embarrassment at its modest size. His house was small, just 3 rooms, built from adobe with a wooden porch he had added himself. The barn was larger, necessary for his dozen head of cattle and whiskey, and there was a chicken coop and a small corral. It wasn't much, but it was his, earned through 10 years of hard work. He carried Magnolia inside and lit several lamps, revealing a space that was clean but sparse. The main room served as kitchen and sitting area, with a stone fireplace and simple furniture he had built himself. The spare room had been his storage space, but he had managed to fit a narrow bed in there a year ago when a traveling preacher needed a place to stay. "It's not fancy," he said as he laid her carefully on the bed. "It's wonderful," she said, and he thought she meant it. "You have your own land." That's more than most people can say. He brought her water and a plate of cold beans left over from his dinner, then stood awkwardly in the doorway. "I'll be in the other room if you need anything. Just call." "Dakota," she said as he turned to leave, "thank you for everything today. You saved my life. Anyone would have done the same." "No," she said firmly. "Not anyone would have climbed those rocks. Most people would have gone for help, and by the time they returned, the cliff face would have collapsed completely. You didn't hesitate. That means something." He nodded, not trusting himself to speak, and left her to rest. Over the next few days, they fell into an unexpected rhythm. Dakota rose early to tend his cattle and horses, then returned to help Magnolia with washing and dressing, carefully averting his eyes to preserve her modesty. He cooked simple meals, beans and bacon and cornbread, and she surprised him by offering suggestions from her spot at the kitchen table, where he carried her each morning. "If you add some of those wild onions growing by your well, the beans would have more flavor," she said on the third day. "I don't know which ones are onions and which might be poisonous," he admitted. Her eyes lit up despite the pain lines around them. "Let me see them. I can tell you." He brought her a handful of plants, and she sorted through them with the focused attention of someone doing work they loved. "These are wild onions, safe to eat. These are edible too, a type of desert parsley. And this," she held up a small plant with delicate leaves, "is absolutely not to be eaten unless you want severe stomach cramps." "How do you know all this?" he asked, fascinated. "My father taught me." He believed that knowledge of plants was essential knowledge, that the natural world held answers to most of our problems if we just learned to look properly. Her voice softened with memory. "He used to take me on long walks through the parks in Philadelphia, teaching me to identify every plant, every tree. Other girls were learning piano and embroidery, and I was learning taxonomy and botanical illustration. Did you mind being different from the other girls?" She considered this. "Sometimes. It was lonely, being the strange girl who preferred plants to parties. But I loved learning, loved the work. I just wished I could have done both somehow, been someone who belonged in drawing rooms but also in laboratories." "You belong here," Dakota said without thinking, then felt his face heat. "I mean in this territory, where being practical matters more than being proper." She smiled at him, and it was like watching the sun break through clouds. "I think you might be right." As the days passed, Dakota found himself inventing excuses to stay near the house. His cattle had never been checked on so frequently. His repairs never so thorough, because each task took him past the kitchen window where he could see Magnolia sitting at the table, studying the plant specimens she had insisted he bring from her room above the general store. Dr. Mercer visited every few days to check her progress and to discuss her research, and Dakota learned that she wasn't just a research assistant but a genuine scientist in her own right, even if the world wouldn't recognize her as such. "The Cherokee have been using this plant for generations to treat inflammation," she explained to the doctor during one visit, carefully sketching the specimen in her journal. "If we can understand the chemical properties, we might be able to create a more effective treatment than what we currently have. The medical establishment in the East won't take this seriously coming from an Arizona Territory doctor," Dr. Mercer said regretfully. "Let alone from a female research assistant." "Then we publish it under your name and don't mention mine," Magnolia said pragmatically. "The knowledge is what matters, not who gets credit." Dakota, listening from where he was ostensibly repairing a chair, felt anger rise in his throat. "That's not right." Both Magnolia and the doctor looked at him in surprise. He set down his tools and stood. "She's doing the work. She should get the recognition." "The world doesn't work that way," Magnolia said gently. "Maybe it should," he replied stubbornly, and she looked at him with something in her eyes that made his heart race. After Dr. Mercer left, she called him over to the table. "That was kind of you to say. Most men would think me presumptuous for even wanting credit. You're not presumptuous. You're brilliant." The words came out more intensely than he intended, and he saw her eyes widen slightly. "Dakota, I mean it. Watching you work, listening to you talk about your research, I've never met anyone like you. You see the world differently, and you make me see it differently too." She was quiet for a long moment, her fingers tracing the edge of her journal. "I've been meaning to talk to you about something. I've been here almost 2 weeks now, and I'm healing well. Dr. Mercer says I can start putting weight on my legs soon. I should start thinking about returning to my room in town. Something cold settled in Dakota's chest. "Is that what you want?" "I don't know," she admitted, and when she looked up at him, her eyes were troubled. "This has been the strangest 2 weeks of my life. I nearly died. I'm trapped in the house of a man I barely know, unable to do my work or take care of myself. By all rights, I should be miserable, but I'm not. I'm happier than I've been in years, and I don't know what to do with that." Dakota pulled out the chair next to her and sat down. His heart was pounding so hard he was sure she could hear it. "I've been doing some thinking, too. Before you came here, my life was simple. I worked, I saved money, I planned for a future that looked exactly like my present, just with maybe more cattle and a bigger barn. But these past 2 weeks, having you here, talking with you, learning from you, it's like I was living in black and white before and someone suddenly added color." "That's poetry," she said softly. "I'm not good with words, not like you are with your scientific terms and your descriptions. But I know that when I think about you leaving, it feels like something being torn away. And I know that's crazy because we barely know each other, and I have no right to feel this way. What if I feel the same way?" She interrupted, her voice barely above a whisper. He stared at her. "Do you?" "I think I started falling in love with you on that mountain," she said, and her cheeks flushed pink, but she held his gaze. "When you kept climbing even though you could have died. When you came back for my specimens even though I told you not to. When you looked at me like I was someone worth saving. And then every day since, watching you work, seeing how kind you are, how thoughtful, how you never once made me feel like a burden or an obligation. Yes, Dakota, I feel the same way." He reached for her hand and she let him take it, her fingers curling around his. "I don't know how this works. I've never courted anyone before. I've always been too busy working, too focused on surviving to think about anything else." "I've never been courted," she admitted. "In Philadelphia, I was too strange for the men my father knew. They wanted wives who would host dinner parties and manage households, not partners who would spend their time with their noses in books and their hands dirty from digging up plant samples." "I don't want a wife who hosts dinner parties," Dakota said. "I want a partner who challenges me, who teaches me things, who sees the world in ways I never imagined. I want someone who argues about plants when her leg is broken, and who smiles like sunshine when she discovers something new." "That's very specific," she said, but she was smiling, and her eyes were bright with unshed tears. "I want you," he said simply. "If you'll have me. I know I don't have much to offer. This ranch is small, the work is hard, and I can't promise you luxury or comfort. But I can promise you honesty and partnership and land where you can study every plant that grows for miles around. And I can promise you love, Magnolia. If you give me the chance, I'll love you for the rest of my life." A tear spilled down her cheek and she reached up to cup his face with her free hand. "I don't need luxury or comfort. I need purpose and passion and someone who sees me for who I really am. You offer me all of that and more. So yes, Dakota Zane, yes to all of it." He leaned forward slowly, giving her time to pull away if she wanted, but she met him halfway. Their first kiss was gentle, tentative, flavored with salt from her tears and sweet with promise. When they finally pulled apart, both of them were grinning like fools. "So what happens now?" she asked. "Now I court you properly," he said. "Dr. Mercer has to clear you to walk, and I need to ask him formally for permission to call on you, even though you've been living in my house for 2 weeks." She laughed, the sound bright and free. "That seems backward." "Most of this seems backward," he agreed. "But I want to do right by you. I want everyone in Nogales to know that I'm courting you with honorable intentions." Over the next few weeks, as Magnolia's leg healed, they did things properly despite the unusual circumstances. Dr. Mercer, after initial surprise, gave his blessing for Dakota to court his research assistant. Mrs. Chen from the general store visited and declared herself delighted by the match, having apparently suspected there was something special between them from the moment Dakota had carried Magnolia into town. Even Father Rodriguez from the small Catholic church stopped by to offer his congratulations and to mention, not so subtly, that he would be happy to perform a wedding ceremony when the time came. Magnolia began walking with crutches, then with a cane, her strength returning day by day. Dakota built her a work table on the porch where she could sit and study her specimens without having to navigate stairs. He brought her samples from all over his property, and she taught him their names and properties, her passion for her work evident in every word. "This is Indian paintbrush," she said, holding up a vibrant red flower. "And this is desert marigold. They grow in poor soil, thriving where other plants would wither. They're survivors." "Like you," he said, and she blushed but looked pleased. In November, when the desert cooled and the sky turned that particular shade of blue unique to Arizona winters, Dakota took Magnolia into town in his wagon, carefully helping her down at the general store. She still walked with a slight limp that Dr. Mercer said would likely be permanent, but she moved with confidence, her chin high and her eyes bright. "I want to show you something," he said, guiding her down the street to the land office. Inside, he spoke to the clerk and then led Magnolia to look at a map on the wall. "This is my property," he said, pointing to the marked section. 20 acres. It's not much, but it's mine free and clear. And I was thinking that if you agreed, we could use some of the land for something other than cattle. Maybe we could set up a proper research garden, with irrigation and cold frames for winter growing. You could study plants right on our property, and maybe even cultivate some of the medicinal ones for Dr. Mercer's practice." Magnolia stared at the map, then at him, her eyes wide. "You would do that? Set aside land for my work? It's not just your work. If you marry me, it becomes our work. Your research is as important as my cattle, maybe more so if it helps people. I want to build a life where both of us can do what we love." She threw her arms around his neck, not caring that they were in a public office, that the clerk was watching with interest, that this was highly improper behavior for 1885. "Yes," she said against his shoulder. "Yes to the garden, yes to the partnership, yes to everything. Yes, I'll marry you." He kissed her right there in the land office, and the clerk discreetly turned away, but Dakota could see him grinning. They were married in January of 1886, in Father Rodriguez's church with Dr. Mercer and Mrs. Chen, and half of Nogales in attendance. Magnolia wore a simple blue dress that brought out the color of her eyes, and Dakota wore his only suit, brushed and pressed with unusual care. When he slipped the gold ring onto her finger, he felt something settle into place, like a puzzle piece finally finding its home. Their first year of marriage was filled with work and discovery. Dakota expanded his herd and built a better barn, while Magnolia transformed 2 acres of their property into an organized research garden. She cultivated native plants alongside vegetables, taking careful notes on their growth patterns and medicinal properties. Dr. Mercer visited weekly, marveling at her work, and began to build a reputation throughout the territory for his effective treatments, always careful to mention his research assistant's contributions, even if the Eastern medical journals ignored them. They worked side by side, Dakota learning the difference between yarrow and chamomile, Magnolia learning how to predict weather patterns by watching the cattle. In the evenings, they would sit on the porch he had expanded, watching the sun set over the mountains, her hand in his. "Do you ever regret it?" he asked one night. "Marrying a cowboy instead of staying free to pursue your work without interference?" "You've never interfered with my work," she pointed out. "You've supported it, enabled it, celebrated it, How could I regret that? She leaned her head on his shoulder. Besides, I didn't marry just a cowboy. I married my best friend, my partner, the man who climbed through unstable rocks to reach me when I needed him most. That's worth more than any career I could have had alone. In the fall of 1886, Magnolia told him she was pregnant. Dakota felt terror and joy in equal measure, remembering his mother's difficult pregnancies, the brother who hadn't survived childhood. But Dr. Mercer assured them that Magnolia was healthy and strong, and that he would personally oversee her care. Their son was born in May of 1887, a healthy baby with his mother's eyes and his father's stubborn chin. They named him William, after Magnolia's father, and Dakota held him in the early morning light with tears streaming down his face, overwhelmed by the reality of this tiny person who was part of both of them. Magnolia returned to her research when William was 3 months old, working while the baby slept in a basket beside her work table. Dakota built her a larger greenhouse, enclosed so she could work through the winter, and she began corresponding with botanists at universities across the country, slowly building a reputation despite the barriers against women in science. Their daughter arrived in 1889, a fierce little thing they named Charlotte, who seemed determined to keep up with her older brother from the moment she could crawl. Dakota had never imagined himself as a father of two, but he discovered he loved it, loved teaching William about the cattle and the land, loved watching Charlotte toddle after her mother in the garden, her small hands reaching for flowers. The years rolled past, marked by seasonal changes and small victories. Dakota's herd grew to 50 head, then 70. Magnolia published her first paper in a scientific journal, though only after Dr. Mercer had insisted her name appear as primary author. Their children grew healthy and strong, William becoming serious and thoughtful like his mother, Charlotte developing her father's stubbornness and her mother's curiosity. In 1895, when William was 8 and Charlotte 6, a letter arrived from Harvard University. Magnolia read it 3 times before she could speak, her hands shaking. "They want to publish my research," she whispered. "All of it, in a comprehensive volume. They're calling it groundbreaking work in ethnobotany and medicinal plants of the American Southwest." Dakota swept her into his arms, spinning her around in the kitchen while the children laughed and demanded to know what was happening. "You did it," he said. "You showed them all." "We did it," she corrected. "I couldn't have done any of this without you, without this land, without the life we built together." The book was published in 1896, bound in green cloth with gold lettering. Medicinal Flora of Arizona Territory by Magnolia Hayes Zane. Copies arrived in Nogales to great excitement, and the general store displayed one in the window with a sign declaring, "Written by our own Mrs. Zane." Magnolia laughed at the fuss, but Dakota saw the pride in her eyes and felt his heart swell with his own pride in her accomplishments. More opportunities came. Universities wanted her to lecture. Botanical societies invited her to join. But Magnolia declined most of them, preferring to continue her work on their Arizona ranch, corresponding with colleagues by mail, occasionally traveling with Dakota to give talks in Tucson or Phoenix. Their life together had found its rhythm, a balance between work and family, ambition and contentment. In 1898, they stood together on Patagonia Mountain, having ridden up the trail that now existed thanks to the railroad company's expansion. They walked carefully to the place where the cliff face had once been unstable, now stabilized with the same engineering that had made rail travel through the territory possible. "It's strange seeing it like this," Magnolia said, looking at the secure rock face. "So different from that day." "That day changed everything," Dakota said, his arm around her waist. "I think about it sometimes, about all the things that had to happen exactly as they did. If you had climbed a different section, if I had been working further from town, if those rocks had given way 5 minutes earlier." "But they didn't," she said, turning to face him. "You found me, you saved me, and we built something beautiful from that moment. That's what matters." He kissed her there on the mountain, in the place where their story had begun 13 years earlier, and it felt like completing a circle, like a promise renewed. Their third child, a son they named James, arrived in 1899, a surprise that sent Charlotte into raptures at finally having a baby to dote on. William, now 12, took his role as oldest brother seriously, helping his father teach James about the ranch while Charlotte helped her mother in the garden and the greenhouse. By 1902, Dakota's ranch had grown to one of the most successful small operations in southern Arizona territory. His cattle were healthy and well managed, his land productive, and his wife's research garden had become something of a destination for scientists and doctors throughout the region. They had built a larger house, adding rooms for their growing family, and a separate building for Magnolia's laboratory and library. On a warm evening in May of that year, they sat on their porch as they had done countless times before, watching the sun set behind the mountains. William was reading to his younger siblings from a book about natural history, his voice carrying through the open door. Charlotte was sketching plants in a journal that mirrored her mother's. James, at 3, was arranging stones in patterns only he understood. "Did you ever imagine this?" Magnolia asked, her head on Dakota's shoulder, their hands intertwined. "When you were climbing those unstable rocks, did you imagine it would lead to all of this?" "I wasn't thinking much beyond getting you to safety," he admitted. "But I felt something that day, even before I reached you. Some sense that my life was about to change in ways I couldn't predict." "My brave cowboy," she said fondly, "climbing through danger to rescue the strange woman collecting plants." "The brilliant woman," he corrected. "The woman who would become my wife, the mother of my children, my partner in everything. The woman who taught me that love isn't about grand gestures but about daily choices to support each other, to build something together that's bigger than either of us alone." She lifted her face to kiss him, and after all these years it still sent warmth through his entire body. "I love you, Dakota Zane. I loved you when you carried me down that mountain, and I'll love you until the day I die and beyond. And I love you, Magnolia Hayes Zane. Always have, always will." They sat in comfortable silence as the stars began to appear, one by one, in the darkening sky. The sounds of their children drifted through the open door, mixed with the distant lowing of cattle and the evening song of birds. The desert air smelled of sage and the flowers Magnolia cultivated, and somewhere a coyote called to its mate. It was an ordinary evening in an extraordinary life, built on a foundation of courage and kindness, sustained by love and partnership, enriched by work that mattered and family that thrived. From the moment, Dakota had heard Magnolia's scream echoing through that canyon, through the terrifying climb up unstable rocks, through the careful descent with her on his back, through courtship and marriage and children and all the years of building a life together. Every step had led them here. To this porch, this land, this family. To this moment of perfect contentment where past and present and future all converged into a single truth. They had found in each other what they had both been searching for without knowing it. Home, partnership, love that deepened with every passing year. Inside, Charlotte called out that James had fallen asleep over his stones and William said he would carry him to bed. Magnolia started to rise, but Dakota held her hand, keeping her beside him for one more moment. "Stay," he said. "They can manage. Let's just sit here a while longer." She settled back against him with a contented sigh. "A while longer," she agreed. And so they sat, the cowboy and the scientist, the man who had climbed through unstable rocks and the woman whose trapped form he had reached, watching the stars multiply overhead and feeling the solid ground beneath them, the ground they had claimed together and made their own. The Wild West was changing around them, becoming more settled, more civilized, but here on their ranch outside Nogales, Arizona territory, they had created something timeless, a love that had begun with an act of courage and grown through countless acts of devotion. A family that carried both their strengths, a legacy of knowledge and care that would outlast them both, and a happiness that neither had dared to dream of in the years before fate and falling rocks had brought them together. The night deepened, the desert cooled, and still they sat together, reluctant to end this perfect evening. But eventually, Magnolia stood and held out her hand to him, and Dakota took it, letting her pull him to his feet. They walked inside together, checking on their sleeping children, banking the fire, preparing for another day in the life they had built. And in the morning, they would wake to do it all again, to work and love and laugh and live in the land they called home, under the vast Arizona sky. Two people who had found each other against all odds and held on tight, never letting go.